I was 3 sips into my Saturday morning coffee when I heard the sound that makes every homeowner flinch, a diesel engine rumbling way too close to the house. I stepped out onto the porch, mug in hand, and there it was. An excavator, not a little one either, full-sized, bright yellow, chewing into the strip of grass that ran along my southern fence line like it owed it money. There were 2 guys in safety vests directing the operator, one of them waving a laminated map like we were about to break ground on a mall. I called out, calm but loud, "Can I help you, or are you just lost and extremely confident about it?" The one with the map looked up. He had the kind of expression that said he got yelled at often, but never by anyone important. "Mr. Rios?" "Unfortunately, yes." He pointed to the trench they were starting. "We're with Unified Infrastructure Solutions. HOA authorized this. Fiber optic routing for community connectivity. Your section's marked for conduit access. Shouldn't take more than 2 days." He said it like I should be grateful. I blinked. "You're digging on my property?" He hesitated just long enough to confirm he knew that. "Well, according to our docs, this part here's subject to shared utility easement. HOA has access." "Oh, do they?" I took a long sip of coffee, because last I checked, I don't recall signing over any rights to carve up my land like a Thanksgiving turkey. He shrugged and tapped his laminated page. "You'll want to talk to your HOA president. We just do the digging." Of course, Leonard Carver, the man who shook your hand like he was filing a lawsuit and smiled like he knew where your buried pets were. I stepped off the porch, walked the fence line, and yep, at least 5 feet inside my property markers. My wife, Marlene, God rest her relentless need for precision, had insisted we verify every boundary ourselves when we bought the place. She even made me paint the survey stakes neon orange. I still had the photos. That trench? It wasn't in a shared zone. It was in my yard. And my yard wasn't for rent. It's funny, I moved to Valley Ridge Estates for peace. I'd spent 20 years prosecuting mid-level corruption for the state. Most of it was boring, some of it was horrifying, and all of it made me tired. After Marlene passed, I didn't want to live in a high-rise condo or downtown loft. I wanted birds, grass, a porch to sit on, and a patch of land to keep me from floating away. So when I found this place, one-story ranch with a wraparound porch and a stubborn lemon tree out back, I knew it was home. Quiet neighborhood, modest houses, mostly retirees and folks who nodded when you waved. The HOA brochure said all the right things. Community-driven, resident-focused, minimal fees. I didn't read the fine print like I should have. That was my first mistake. My second was assuming a man like Leonard Carver got elected president because no one else wanted the job. I figured he was the usual HOA type, retired, bored, obsessed with garbage can placement. What I didn't expect was a former corporate attorney with a custom-engraved pen set and a deep, abiding hatred for private space. The kind of guy who says, per my last email in casual conversation. He introduced himself the week after I moved in, standing on my porch with a handshake like a wet credit card and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Rios, welcome to the Ridge. I hope you find our community standards agreeable." He handed me a binder, not a pamphlet, a binder. 3 inches thick, labeled Valley Ridge Covenants, Conditions and Restrictions. I flipped it open later that night while eating leftover carnitas. Page 1 was a mission statement. Page 2 had rules about lawn edging. By page 6, we were into mailbox color codes and shrubbery height restrictions. I closed it halfway through a section titled Acceptable Fence Finishes by Soil Type and decided I'd just wing it and stay invisible. That worked for a while, until now. Because standing there in my slippers, watching strangers dig a trench through the lawn I'd resodded myself last spring, I realized something. This wasn't about fiber optics, this was about territory, and Leonard Carver had just stepped over the line, literally, and legally, and I was going to make sure he regretted it. I called Leonard Carver before the trench hit my sprinkler line. He didn't answer. I left a message anyway. Calm, precise, the tone I used in court when I wanted opposing counsel to know I'd already read their playbook and found the typo on page 2. "Leonard, it's Gabe Rios. I've got construction happening on my property, unauthorized. The crew says it was approved by you under some phantom easement. Just a heads up, I have boundary surveys, time-stamped photos, and a strong allergy to trespassing. Call me back." By the time I hung up, the excavator had already scraped through a row of marigolds Marlene planted the year we moved in. That's when I asked the crew to stop. To their credit, they did. Temporarily. They weren't happy about it, but I made it clear that if their next move involved another foot of soil, they'd be doing it in front of a sheriff's deputy and a very chatty local reporter. They packed up. For the day. The next morning, I found the violation notice, folded and taped to my front door like a passive-aggressive love letter. Notice of noncompliance, unauthorized interference with community infrastructure project. Immediate correction required. Fines to commence in 72 hours. It was printed on HOA letterhead and signed in Leonard Carver's immaculate, joyless handwriting. He even underlined the words, "immediate correction required," like that was going to intimidate me into forgetting how property law works. I laughed. Then I read it again. Because buried in the fine print was a gem. The HOA claimed my southern boundary was subject to limited access for the purposes of communal utility deployment, under Resolution 19B, approved March of last year. Funny thing, March of last year, the HOA board didn't meet. I checked the minutes, because I have them, because I asked for them the day I moved in. There was no Resolution 19B, no vote, no approval, just a ghost clause Leonard had stapled onto the bottom of a policy that used to be about mailbox height. I walked the fence line again that afternoon, this time with my phone out, took fresh photos, talked to my neighbor Mark, a retired cartographer who mows his lawn like it's a golf course and keeps every HOA newsletter dating back to 2004 in laminated sleeves. We sat on his patio with iced tea while he pulled a binder off the shelf labeled Easement Shenanigans. His words, not mine. Leonard's been trying to redraw lines since he got the title, Mark said, flipping to a hand-drawn map with angry red X's. He calls it modernization. I call it land grab in a tie. He showed me 3 other cases. Residents pressured into voluntary access agreements for things like community signage and landscape routing. The signs went up, but the access turned permanent. In one case, a gazebo was built partially inside someone's yard. HOA claimed shared enjoyment clause. Turns out I wasn't the first. I was just the first who read every word of every document I signed, and that made me dangerous. That night, I wrote a formal cease and desist letter to Leonard, cited property law, attached photos, boundary surveys, and a notarized statement from the title company verifying my lot's dimensions. Hand-delivered it to the HOA office myself the next morning, which is how I got to see the real nerve of the operation. HOA headquarters was a trailer, not a trailer with a porch and charm. A faded, sad box with fake brick skirting and a rusted mailbox labeled Carver. There was a security camera above the door, blinking like it had somewhere better to be. Inside, the place smelled like cheap carpet cleaner and bad decisions. A receptionist glanced up from a Sudoku puzzle. "You hear about the trench?" "Yep." She sighed. "You're the third this week." "Third this week?" Before she could answer, the inner door swung open. Leonard Carver in the flesh. Tan slacks, a navy blazer, no socks with loafers, which should be a crime in itself. He smiled like I'd walked into his chess match and moved his queen. "Mr. Rios," he said, "I was just about to call you." I handed him the folder. "No need. Everything you need is in here, including my formal request that you halt all activity on my property, immediately." He flipped through the pages like they bored him. Then he smiled wider. "Gabe, I understand this all seems a bit sudden, but I assure you, Resolution 19B was passed in accordance with HOA bylaws. You can review it at your leisure." He handed me a copy printed that morning. Fresh ink, no signatures, no timestamps. Just his name at the bottom in bold, like that made it divine law. "This resolution doesn't exist in the HOA records," I said. "Well," he said, folding his hands, "now it does." And just like that, I knew exactly what kind of man I was dealing with, not a rule follower. A rule rewriter. He stood and walked me to the door like I was the one who'd overstepped. "We appreciate your engagement, Mr. Rios," he said, "but this is bigger than one backyard." "Don't worry," I said. "I plan to treat it accordingly." Then I left, and made a promise to myself. If Leonard Carver wanted a war over 6 feet of grass and a fake resolution, he was about to learn what happens when you pick a legal fight with someone who used to prosecute fraud for breakfast. Because this wasn't just about easements anymore. This was about control, and I wasn't giving him an inch. I thought the fake easement and the passive-aggressive door notice were the warm-up act. Turns out, Leonard was just getting started. 2 days after our little trailer showdown, I came home from teaching to find a 6-foot metal sign staked right into my front lawn. Notice, this property is under active violation review by the Valley Ridge HOA Compliance Division. In bold, in red, right next to Marlene's lavender bushes. My first thought was, well, that's new. My second was, they're escalating. I didn't even bother going inside. I stood there reading the sign like it might explain itself when a silver Lexus crawled by slow enough to raise suspicions and lower my blood pressure. Sure enough, clipboard, sunglasses, HOA, decal on the window. They drove past like a predator marking its territory. I yanked the sign out of the ground and tossed it onto the porch, bent the stake, no regrets. Inside, my voicemail had 3 new messages, all from the HOA office. Message 1. Mr. Rios, your recent removal of compliance signage violates HOA bylaw section 5.2c. Message 2. We've scheduled a mandatory site review of your property for Thursday at 10 a.m. Please ensure all structures are accessible to inspectors. Message 3. Failure to comply may result in enforcement intervention and associated legal penalties. Legal penalties. For removing a sign from my own yard. Leonard was trying to flood the zone, bury me in procedures, noise, and fictional regulations until I either gave up or gave in. Unfortunately for him, I have a high threshold for bureaucratic nonsense. Comes with the job. Also, I've read more obscure policy manuals than most people read menus. But the real kicker came Thursday morning. I was sitting at the kitchen table halfway through a bowl of oatmeal when I saw them through the blinds. 4 of them. Not inspectors, not surveyors. Compliance agents. That's what the little patches on their matching polos said. They looked like mall cops on a power trip. Utility belts, boots, sunglasses. One had a handheld tablet, another had a GoPro strapped to his chest like he thought this was a Discovery Channel special. They didn't knock. They didn't announce themselves. They just started walking the property, measuring, scanning, photographing. One leaned over the back fence to peer into my shed. I stepped outside. "Gentlemen," I said, calm but loud, "you're trespassing?" The one with the GoPro didn't even flinch. "This is an authorized inspection under HOA enforcement protocol. You were notified." "You notified me of a review. You didn't say anything about 4 uninvited uniformed tourists." I walked toward them, slow and deliberate, like I was giving them a chance to think harder than they'd been paid to. The lead guy, mid-30s, buzz cut, clipboard grip like it held the nuclear codes, stepped forward. "Mr. Rios, we're documenting multiple violations, including unauthorized landscaping modifications, non-compliant exterior paint, and a storage unit exceeding HOA visibility thresholds." I actually laughed. "You mean the raised bed my wife built before she passed? The shed that's been here since the house was constructed in 2006? Or the paint that matches the HOA-approved palette listed on page 9 of the handbook?" He blinked, a half-second delay, not a man used to being corrected mid-script. "I'd advise you to stop filming and get off my property," I said. "Now." "We're authorized to collect visual evidence," he said, "of crimes, not imaginary infractions, and not on private land without consent." He raised the tablet, probably to quote something. That's when I took out my phone and started filming them. He noticed, so did the others. GoPro guy shifted his weight. Another one started backing toward the sidewalk. "I've already contacted the county," I said, still recording. "If you want to test whether that fabricated Resolution 19B holds up in court, I'll be happy to let a judge explain it to you." Buzzcut looked like he wanted to say something clever, but came up empty. Instead, he nodded once, tight and fake. "Have a good day, Mr. Rios." They turned and left. No apologies, no eye contact, just tactical retreat. I watched them regroup by their SUV, arguing quietly, glancing back like they'd just seen a dog talk. They drove off slow, probably to make it look like they weren't retreating. But I knew better. So did they. I spent the rest of the day reviewing every policy document I'd collected, scanning for anything Leonard might try to twist next. Then I checked my mail. Because of course, there was another letter. Violation notice. Failure to comply with authorized site review. $250 fine. Payable within 10 days. Additional penalties may apply. At the bottom, in tiny print, repeat violations may be referred to legal collections and/or property lien action. And just like that, Leonard played his next card. He wasn't just throwing fines, he was building a paper trail, trying to manufacture a history of non-compliance so he could file a lien and force me into settlement. I'd seen the tactic before, only this time it wasn't some corporate slumlord. It was a man with a title, a trailer, and just enough legal knowledge to be dangerous. He wanted to turn my home into leverage, a tool, a domino, one he could knock down for profit, and I was starting to understand why. I didn't go nuclear, not yet. I played it by the book, Leonard's book, ironically. Chapter and verse of the HOA handbook he loved to swing like scripture, but this time I read it better than he did. I filed a formal dispute in triplicate, certified mail, then I emailed the dispute, then I walked it down to the HOA trailer in person, handed it to the Sudoku-loving receptionist, and asked for a stamped receipt. She didn't look up from her puzzle, just reached for the stamp like it personally offended her. Within 24 hours, I received a polite but entirely meaningless response. "Your appeal has been received and will be reviewed by the compliance committee during our next scheduled session." That session? 2 weeks away. I replied with a question. Is the accrual of daily fines paused during the appeal process? Answer: silence. So I took it up a level. I drove to the county records office the next morning, brought coffee and a box of decent donuts for the staff, because I may be at war, but I'm not uncivilized. There, I met a clerk named Brianna, who spoke fluent bureaucratic and had zero patience for HOA nonsense. I asked her to pull every property filing related to Valley Ridge Estates, with special attention to easement revisions and recent development permits. She gave me a side-eye, then typed for about 5 minutes. "Busy week for your neighborhood," she said. "A lot of movement. Here, this one's interesting." She slid a manila folder across the counter. Inside, a permit request filed 2 months ago by a company called East Loop Infrastructure LLC, asking for clearance to run underground fiber through a portion of community-owned easement 6B. 6B didn't exist on the original plat map. Guess where it showed up? Right through my side yard. The request was signed off by a representative of the HOA, Leonard Carver, with an attachment claiming full community approval via a board vote. Except there was no record of that vote in any of the HOA meeting minutes, not on paper, not online, not in the quarterly newsletter that normally listed every mosquito control budget decision like it was breaking news. I thanked Brianna, took the documents, and headed straight to the zoning commission. There, I asked a very polite but overworked staff attorney whether an HOA president could legally grant easement rights to a private contractor without a vote from the board or the affected homeowner. He looked at the forms, flipped through twice. "Nope," he said, "not unless your governing documents explicitly delegate that authority." Then he smiled. "And judging by the thickness of your file, I'm guessing they don't." I smiled back. Bingo. I sent a follow-up letter to the HOA, attached all the documents. I CC'd Leonard, the board members, and just for fun, I threw in a local journalist I knew who loved a good David versus Goliath. HOA story. Still, I wasn't trying to go public yet. I gave them a chance. I ended the letter with this: "I'm offering this final opportunity for voluntary correction before pursuing legal remedies. Retract the fines, halt the construction, and issue a written acknowledgement of overreach. If I don't receive confirmation within 5 business days, I'll proceed accordingly." I hit send. Then I waited. On day 4, I got a reply. From Leonard himself. "Mr. Rios, we appreciate your attention to detail. However, our legal team believes we are operating within full compliance of HOA regulations. We welcome any additional clarification you wish to provide. Regards, Leonard Carver, President, Valley Ridge, HOA." It was the HOA equivalent of a smug shrug. No denial, no concession. Just enough plausible language to keep the dance going while he continued racking up fines. That was the moment I realized something important. Leonard didn't think he had to win. He just thought I'd fold. The same way every other resident probably had. 1 or 2 complaints, a couple of meetings, then resignation. Pay the fine, move on. But Leonard made one mistake. He came after the wrong guy. Because unlike most people in Valley Ridge, I knew how this game worked. I'd taught this game, and I wasn't interested in folding. I was interested in pulling receipts. And setting the stage. The next letter didn't come by mail. It came by courier. Hand-delivered, signature required, as if I'd ordered a package of legal threats from Amazon Prime. The envelope was thick. Embossed HOA letterhead. Inside, 22 pages of legalese, all dancing around one central idea. They were initiating formal lien proceedings on my property. For chronic noncompliance, obstruction of authorized infrastructure development, and, this was my favorite, unneighborly conduct in violation of community cohesion standards. Unneighborly conduct, that's what you get when a lawyer with too much time and not enough ethics starts writing fiction. I read the whole thing twice. They were claiming nearly $4,000 in accumulated fines, fees, and administrative processing penalties. Not because I broke actual laws, but because I'd refused to let them dig on my land, remove my shed, or repaint my trim. Then I saw the kicker. Failure to resolve outstanding obligations within 30 days may result in forced foreclosure procedures as authorized by HOA Charter Amendment 14C. I'd read the entire HOA charter 3 times. There was no 14C, I called it what it was. Manufactured leverage, fake rule, fake authority, very real consequences. Because even if it wouldn't hold up in court, most people wouldn't take it that far. They'd panic, pay, and pray. It went away. That was the play. I knew it. But Leonard didn't stop there. 2 days after the letter, I came home from campus and noticed something off. My side gate, normally padlocked, was hanging open. The lock cut clean through. The latch twisted. I walked the perimeter. Footprints in the mulch near the shed, fresh ones, 2 sets. Whoever it was didn't try to hide it. They wanted me to see it. The message wasn't subtle. We can come in whenever we want. I checked the cameras, or rather, I tried. My front porch cam was offline. Backyard? Nothing. Garage feed? Dead. Someone had pulled the hard line. I stood there in the dark with the taste of copper rising in my mouth. Not fear, anger, the kind that burns cold. I walked inside, locked every door, and sat at my desk. That night, I rewired the whole surveillance system, replaced everything with wireless uplinks and triple cloud backups, set up motion alerts, redundancy on redundancy. Then I pulled up my offsite storage and checked the timestamps. 12 hours earlier, right after I'd left for work, 2 men in black polos with HOA compliance patches had walked into my yard. No warning, no authorization, no warrant. They spent 20 minutes photographing the shed, the fencing, and for some reason, my grill. Then one of them cut the camera wire, looked straight at the lens and smiled before he did it. I clipped the footage, timestamped it, and stored it on 3 separate drives. One went in my safe, another went to a lawyer friend I trusted. The third I labeled "in case of idiots" and put in my freezer. Then I made a phone call. Not to Leonard, not to the police, because I knew exactly how little they'd do when it was framed as an HOA matter. I called Sandra Kim, investigative reporter, local news, covered city corruption, bad zoning deals, and homeowner scams like it was her full-time religion. She picked up on the second ring. "Gabe Rios," she said, "I was wondering when you'd call." I didn't ask how she knew. "Can you come by tomorrow?" "I can be there at 9. I nodded. "Bring a big notepad." The next morning while I made coffee, someone knocked. It wasn't Sandra. It was a man I'd never seen before. Bald, square jaw, mirrored sunglasses, HOA badge clipped to his belt like he bought it on eBay. He handed me another envelope. Emergency order, HOA safety enforcement review, immediate compliance required. I opened it on the spot. This one was different. It wasn't just a fine or a warning. It was a declaration of unsafe structure conditions. The shed, my shed, was now listed as a hazard to community safety. According to them, if it wasn't removed within 5 days, the HOA would initiate direct mitigation measures. In plain English, they were threatening to tear it down themselves. I stared at him. "You planning to bulldoze it with that Prius?" He didn't laugh, just nodded once and walked away. Sandra showed up 20 minutes later. I handed her the stack of documents, then showed her the shed, the sign, the chopped gate, the fake fines, the camera footage. I laid it all out. She took notes like a surgeon. "This happened to anyone else?" she asked. "I think it has," I said. "I just think I'm the first one who didn't curl up." She looked around. "You think they're trying to push you out?" "I think they're trying to set a precedent." She raised an eyebrow. "Make an example out of me so no one else resists." She nodded slowly. "Then we better make an example out of them first." That night, I opened a bottle of Marlene's favorite red, Zinfandel, 2012, the one she used to say, "tastes like rebellion," and I built my case. Not a metaphor. I literally built it. Laptop open, legal pads spread across the kitchen table, 2 printers running, one spitting out property records, the other committee emails I'd quietly scraped from old newsletters and cached web archives. Sandra had given me a gift before she left, access to a private Dropbox folder titled Ridge Leaks. Apparently, I wasn't the only one Leonard had tried to steamroll. Over the last 18 months, 5 separate residents had sent her screenshots, documents, and complaints that never made it to public record, because they had been shut down or bought off before anyone noticed. There were 2 stories that stuck out. One, a widow on Oak Lane, whose backyard garden had been rezoned as utility space just weeks before her property was flagged for demolition under drainage modernization. 2, a couple who fought a fake violation for 6 months only to sell at a loss and leave the state. In both cases, Leonard had either signed off directly or facilitated the paperwork through one of 2 shell companies, East Loop Infrastructure LLC and Millcross Holdings. I remembered East Loop. They were the ones listed on the fake fiber easement through my yard. But Millcross? That was new. So I pulled the filings. Guess who the registered agent was? A woman named Deborah Carver, Leonard's wife. She'd signed as managing director on 6 separate development agreements, 3 of them directly tied to reacquired HOA parcels that used to be someone's backyard. It wasn't just abuse of power anymore, it was a business model. Leonard had turned the HOA into a property acquisition machine. Fake violations, forced compliance, fines, liens, foreclosure or sale, transfer to Millcross. Then, like clockwork, Millcross would submit renovation permits, wait 6 months, and flip the properties to a regional developer. Some under a new subdivision name, the Arbors at Ridge. But it got better, because when I mapped it out, digitally and physically on a corkboard like I was starring in my own episode of Dateline, I realized something. There was a pattern to the takeovers, and the lots all had one thing in common: proximity to a proposed connector road, a road that would run right through Valley Ridge, connecting to a new commercial development Leonard had quietly advocated for at the last town hall meeting. I found the proposal buried in the county planning board agenda from 2 months ago. Leonard's name wasn't on it, but the developer's name? Cypress Redevelopment Group, the same group that bought 3 flipped ridge homes from Millcross in the past year. He wasn't trying to manage a community, he was trying to turn one into an off-ramp. And my lot was the keystone, corner property, wide access, no existing underground utilities, perfect location for a lateral connection to the main grid, which explained the sudden urgency, the trench, the fake violations, the lien threats. He needed me out, and he needed it fast. So I stopped thinking like a resident, and I started thinking like the man I used to be, a prosecutor. The plan wasn't dramatic, no booby traps or secret tunnels, just documentation, timing, and a little media oxygen. First, I filed a formal complaint with the county zoning board, attaching every deed, survey, and forged HOA document I had. I flagged the fake amendment 14C and requested a review of every permit signed by Leonard in the last 12 months. Then I forwarded a redacted version of the Ridge Leaks file to the State HOA Oversight Commission. Normally they don't move fast, but I knew the right phrases to use. Pattern of fraudulent liens, improper corporate benefit, conflict of interest involving family-owned holding companies. That last one always gets attention. I also filed for a temporary restraining order to stop any further construction on my land. I had to jump through a few hoops to get the hearing expedited, but it helped that my supporting documentation included an actual photo of a man in an HOA polo cutting my gate lock. Oh, and I called in a favor from a student of mine who happened to intern at the local ABC affiliate. She set up a meeting for the following week. They wanted to feature one homeowner's stand against HOA abuse. I said yes, provided they brought a camera crew to the next public board meeting. And then I waited. The chessboard was set. Leonard just didn't know he was walking into checkmate. The HOA board meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday evening. I got there early, not because I was eager, but because I knew Leonard would be. Men like him don't show up late to power plays. They arrive first, pick their seat, and treat silence like territory. The room was one of those generic community center setups, folding chairs, fluorescent lights, a podium that had definitely seen better decades. When I walked in, Leonard was already holding court at the front. Navy blazer, fresh haircut, speaking in low tones to 2 board members while pretending not to see me. I gave him a polite nod. He gave me a smile that could have curdled milk. The room filled quickly, more residents than usual. Word had spread, thanks to Sandra's article that hit online 2 days earlier, complete with satellite overlays, forged document highlights, and an interview quote from yours truly under the heading, "They wanted my lawn. What they really wanted was my land." A local ABC crew was parked in the back, quiet, unobtrusive, but very much present. At 6:03 p.m., Leonard tapped the mic like it owed him money. "Good evening, everyone. I'll call this meeting to order. I know there's been some confusion regarding recent compliance actions, so I'd like to begin by reaffirming the board's commitment to transparency, integrity, and..." "Forged documents," I said, just loud enough to interrupt. His jaw tightened. "I'm sorry, Mr. Rios," he said, looking down his nose like he'd practiced it in front of a mirror. "You'll have an opportunity to speak during homeowner comment period." "Great," I said. "Let me know when we get to the part where your wife's shell company shows up on 6 property transfers and you explain why HOA records list a resolution that doesn't exist." Dead silence. Someone coughed. Leonard blinked like he couldn't decide whether to yell or faint, and then Sandra stood up in the back row. "Hi," she said, casual as a coffee order. "Sandra Kim, Channel 7. Would you mind clarifying for the residents whether the HOA has received any financial compensation, direct or indirect, from Millcross Holdings, East Loop Infrastructure, or Cypress Redevelopment Group?" Leonard opened his mouth, closed it. Sweat bloomed at his hairline. "I don't think that's an appropriate question." "Actually," I cut in, "per the HOA charter, any financial entanglements involving board members must be disclosed at public meetings. Section 8.3, paragraph 4. You should know that, Leonard. You signed it." He tried to pivot. "I assure you, all actions taken by this board are within the bounds of our authority." "Then why did you approve easement permits for land you didn't own?" I said. "Why did you file an amendment, 14C that's never been voted on or recorded. Why did your so-called compliance officers enter my property without consent and disable surveillance equipment? I stepped forward, holding up a printout, because if you're so confident in your authority, you won't mind me distributing these. I handed out folders to the front row. Residents started flipping pages, documents, maps, photos, time-stamped emails. Inside you'll find everything, I continued. Proof of illegal easements, forged votes, unregistered LLCs tied to your family, and most importantly, evidence that your decisions as HOA president directly benefit companies you're linked to. He opened his mouth again. That's when Sandra's cameraman turned the lens straight on him, and Leonard, so smooth, so smug, so thoroughly in control, blinked. "Would you like to make a statement?" she asked. He looked at the crowd, then at the lens, then at the stack of folders in front of him. He didn't speak, he left, just turned and walked out of the room. The board sat frozen. One of them, an older woman named Teresa, who once fined me $25 for leaving my recycling out too early, slowly removed her glasses like they'd just betrayed her. The room erupted, not yelling, just questions. Residents firing off complaints. People comparing stories. A retired Marine stood up and said he'd been fined 3 times for unauthorized patriotism after flying an American flag outside the HOA's approved display hours. The dam had cracked. The board tried to recover, but it was too late. Sandra was already interviewing people by the door. The ABC crew started packing up, smiling. And me? I just sat down, folded my arms, and waited, because now the real fun was about to begin. The story aired Thursday night, right after a segment about a raccoon stuck in a vending machine. Perfect placement. By 10:07 p.m., my phone started buzzing. First it was Mark from down the street, who once told me HOA meetings gave him migraines and hives. He just texted, "Holy hell, you really did it." Then came the emails. A couple neighbors I barely knew. One former board member, even a realtor I'd met once at an open house, wrote to say, "That guy tried to pull the same stunt in Oak Hollow. No one stopped him." By the time I got through all the messages, Channel 7 had uploaded the clip to their site. Headline: Homeowner exposes alleged HOA power grab in Valley Ridge. Subheadline: Residents question president's ties to real estate developers. It wasn't just my footage they ran. Sandra had gotten copies of gate cutting, the altered documents, even snippets from that board meeting where Leonard bailed mid-question. They even ran a freeze frame of his face the moment he realized the camera was on. Let's just say he didn't exactly radiate innocent public servant. By morning, the HOA website was offline. So was their Facebook group. By lunchtime, residents were already talking about a vote. And by dinner, I got a knock on the door. It was Teresa, the former board member with the War Against Recycling Bins. This time, no clipboard, no half smile of superiority, just a manila envelope in her hand. "We're calling an emergency special session," she said. "He's stepping down." I opened the envelope. Inside, notice of vote for interim leadership, petition for audit, proposal to suspend all ongoing enforcement actions until further review. She looked tired. Honest tired. Not HOA tired. "For what it's worth," she said, "I think we all got a little too comfortable letting him run the show." I nodded. Power's easy when no one's watching. The meeting was held in the same room, same chairs, same podium, but the energy? Different. Leonard didn't show, no apology, no explanation, just an email read aloud by a visibly sweating HOA secretary that said he was resigning, effective immediately due to personal matters. A few people clapped, someone shouted, "Should have resigned months ago," and there was a small wave of laughter, the kind that starts awkward and ends honest. Then Teresa took the mic. "As interim president," she said, "my first motion is to freeze all fines, suspend all ongoing enforcement actions, and launch a full audit of the HOA's finances and property dealings from the last 3 years." The vote wasn't close, 92 in favor, 2 abstained, no votes against. The second motion? Ban any board member from holding a financial interest in any company contracting with the HOA. That one passed unanimously. And then there was a motion to rename Community Connector Road on the HOA expansion map. The new proposed name? Rios Way. I didn't vote on that one, I just shook my head and laughed. "Absolutely not," I said. "The last thing I want is my name on Leonard's fake driveway." But I appreciated the gesture. The next week I came home to find a box on my porch. No name. Inside, the old metal sign. Property under violation review. Bent, spray painted, and taped to the back, a sticky note. "Thought you might want a souvenir. HOA compliance department, disbanded. Fair enough. I stuck it in the shed. Might make a decent bird perch. 2 weeks later, a county inspector came by. Not the usual clipboard drone, but a woman named Lisa who wore steel-toe boots and didn't bother pretending she hadn't seen the news. "Mr. Rios?" she asked, stepping out of her truck. "That's me. I'm here about the unauthorized trench work filed by East Loop Infrastructure. Wanted to confirm site status." I pointed toward the southern fence line, which now had a fresh "No Access" sign and a small herb garden I'd planted just to make the point more colorful. "No trench," I said, "no easement, no fiber, just rosemary and spite." She chuckled. "Spite grows fast this time of year." She marked her clipboard, snapped 2 photos, and handed me a form. "Permit officially voided. HOA can't authorize access on land it doesn't own, and East Loop's license to operate in the county under review." She paused. "Also, we've opened a fraud investigation into recent filings linked to Millcross Holdings." "Oh?" I said, trying very hard not to smile. "Yep," she nodded. "Turns out the Department of Real Estate has a real interest in forged HOA votes and sweetheart flips. Who knew?" Before she left, she handed me her card, in case anything else turns up. I tucked it into my shirt pocket. Didn't say a word. These days, the neighborhood's quieter. No more mystery finds. No more compliance agents taking long walks with tape measures and tactical vests. They held a new board election last month. Voter turnout tripled. The new president is a retired school librarian named Deborah who bakes cookies for meetings and believes strongly in not harassing people over mailbox dimensions. Progress. My shed still stands. No bulldozers, no liens, just cedar siding and a new motion sensor wired to a solar panel, because if you're going to protect your peace, might as well do it sustainably. I finally fixed the marigolds Marlene planted, dug up the dead roots, laid new soil, added a drip line. They're blooming again. Bright yellow, tough as hell, just like her. And just like this place, this home, I refuse to give up. A few neighbors still walk by and nod a little more respectfully than before. One guy, Greg, 3 houses over, stopped last weekend and asked if I'd ever consider running for the board. I told him I'd rather juggle porcupines in a thunderstorm. He laughed. "Fair, but if you ever change your mind..." "I won't," I said. I waved as he left. Went back to pruning the lavender. I keep the sign, by the way, the original one they staked in my yard. Under violation review. It hangs on the inside of the shed door now, right next to Marlene's gardening tools. Every time I see it, I remember something my old mentor used to say back when I still wore a badge and tie for a living. Power doesn't corrupt, power reveals. And sometimes, all it takes to expose the worst in people is a little patch of grass, a bent rulebook, and someone who knows how to read between the lines. As for me, I've got my peace, my porch, and my property line, untouched, unbothered, and now, finally, respected. Just the way it should be, just the way it always was. The only difference now? They know better, and that's good enough for me.